They arrested the man they found under my bed, but weeks later the knocking started again, from inside my closet. I only noticed after a few hours. Every time I stood up to dance or use the bathroom, his gaze seemed to follow. He never stood up, but even sitting down, he was tall. He sat a head taller than anyone else in the room. I moved seats, and his eyes followed me as I walked across the room and sat down. He didn't turn his head when I looked right at him, but he didn't meet my gaze directly. He stared at some point past my left shoulder. I finished my drink and decided I was leaving, but before that, I was going to confront the man. I stood up, and he watched me stomp towards him. His clothes were baggy, a black jacket and ripped jeans. He had short gray hair, and as I got closer, I noticed his eyes were bright green. I asked why he was staring at me. He told me, "You're the one I came to see." I had to lean in to hear as he was whispering. Up close, his skin was pulled tight against his features, as if it were a size too small. I backed away and asked him what he meant. And that is when things got really weird. He whispered something else I couldn't hear. I left. I ran to the bus stop and waited very impatiently for the bus. He didn't follow, but things were about to get much worse. I got on a bus home and checked that he wasn't on board somehow. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. 20 minutes later, I stepped onto my street and took a deep breath, smelling the sweet autumn air. He was sitting at the bus stop. I didn't say a word and walked in the opposite direction from my house. I checked over my shoulder as I walked away, and he wasn't there. I called my friend Sarah. I took the long way home, and by the time I got back to the house, her car was parked out front. She was standing beside the car. I ran up to her and gave her a hug. "You're drunk," she declared flatly. She hugged me back. We went inside, and I locked every door and window in the house. Afterwards, we sat down, and I explained to her what happened. She asked how much I'd had to drink and if I was sure it was the same man at the bus stop. I told her I was sure. She tried to press me for an answer to her first question when there was a knock at the door. I froze. Sarah stood up and walked towards the door. She asked who was there loudly enough to be heard on the other side. The only reply was another knock. The same 3 sharp knocks that echoed through the quiet house. Sarah looked through the peephole. The same knock sounded again, but this time from a window to my right. I turned and saw him staring at me again. He was smiling this time. I called the police, and we pulled all the blinds shut. The knocking continued. It started downstairs and ended upstairs after several louder, more forceful knocks on an upstairs window. The police found an upstairs bathroom window partially open. They found the man in my bedroom. He had thrown several boxes of my belongings on the floor that were usually kept under my bed. He had tried to crawl underneath. I still remember the sight of 4 officers leading him out. He had to bend down low to fit through the door. They pushed him to the police car, and he was almost lying sideways once inside. He was staring at me again. I thought the nightmare was over, but it was just starting. I didn't stay at home for a few weeks. Sarah let me sleep on her couch. After a while, I missed sleeping in an actual bed, and since he had been caught, Sarah agreed I had nothing to worry about. He was locked away, but my safety was about to vanish. I got home and slept with all the lights on. A few boxes from under my bed were thrown about the floor, but I didn't have the energy to clean them up and flopped onto my bed. I didn't sleep long. I woke up to a dark house.
That wasn't what woke me. It was a sound. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from my closet door. My heart stopped. My eyes hadn't adjusted to the dark, so I couldn't see anything. All I heard was a drawn-out creak as the door slowly pushed open. By the time I heard footsteps walking towards me, I could make out the vague shape of a tall man in my room. He stopped at the foot of my bed. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. I could still see his eyes, and in the moonlight they were still strikingly green. I went to get out of bed slowly. He spoke. "Sleep. I'm here to watch." He whispered again, and each word was accompanied by a wheeze.
I almost kept moving and ran, but he reached 2 long arms down and grabbed my covers. He pulled them up to my shoulders and tucked me in. I just lay there all night with my eyes closed. I could hear him walking around the bed throughout. I didn't dare open my eyes. It was 5 p.m. the next day when I finally opened my eyes. I hadn't heard his breathing or his footsteps in a long enough time to say it was safe to get up. I left and called the police. They said the man had never even made it to the station. He had simply disappeared from the back seat of the car. Sarah kicked me out after the 3rd night of knocking at her house. I haven't slept in days. I can feel my heart beating in my chest with a mix of adrenaline and caffeine. I was driving on Interstate 10 going west. I don't know how far I made it or exactly what state I'm in. I'm inside a gas station. I just paid for another tank of fuel, but outside, sitting in the passenger seat of my car, is a tall, gray-haired man. His neck and shoulders are at an awkward angle to fit inside. He's staring right at me. Up next, my hobby was reenacting the Civil War, but I stopped after one of them became real. I was on the field at a siege battle, working a skirmish line. I normally did artillery, so I wasn't the most graceful with a rifle, but I was having fun. It was late, and we were preparing a final charge over the battlements and into the earthen fort where rebel forces lay. We were all having a grand time, and it was always a hoot to go out en masse in a barrage. We were advancing, and our captain gave the command to charge. We all broke and rushed the defenses, giving the audience a grand finale to all the shooting. I, however, did not get to charge. I slipped on a patch of grass thanks to the smooth soles of my new brogans and fell hard from the flank. No one came to check on me, so I figured they thought I was pretending to get shot, but that didn't stop me from cussing up a storm. I fell hard and was left in the pine straw and leaves while rifles fired in front of me. I started getting dizzy, and after a little bit, all of the commotion seemed to fade away. And then it got weird. Eventually, I pulled myself to my feet and tried to reorient, but something was off. It was dark outside. Pure, unadulterated night had encompassed the woods, and none of my unit was anywhere to be found. But things were about to get much worse. I also couldn't see the fort. All around me were endless trees that seemed to stretch out in uncanny rows of pine and oak. I didn't know what to do, so I shouted out for some of the guys I'd gone to the event with. I walked in circles, trying hard to find a sign of the campsite, the visitor center, or even a road. But there was nothing. I started to panic. I didn't have my phone on me to call for help, so I just started shouting. I was almost at the point of tears and hoarse from screaming for help before a voice came from a few yards behind me. "Lost there, friend?" I turned to see another man in a blue coat with gear like mine, though most of his face and form were covered by the dark blue shade of the evening sky. Even in the moonlight, he was just a silhouette, but one that I was familiar with. I told him how glad I was to see him, then asked if he was with the Pennsylvania group we were camping with. "No," he told me. I'm with the 3rd Kentucky. That struck me as strange, since I wasn't aware of a group under that name participating in the event. However, I brushed it off quickly since I was still disoriented and confused by my loss of time. Do you know where the others are? I asked him. He nodded and pointed to the right of us. We're all still here, friend. All still here down in the hollow. The hollow? I asked. There wasn't any hollow I could think of near the fort, but the man didn't pay any mind to my question. He simply turned and started walking away. Follow me, friend, he told me. Follow me, and we'll all be back together where we ought to be. I followed behind him from a few yards away, leaning on my rifle for support as I trudged. The woods grew thicker as we went, and I tried to ask him more questions, but all he did was keep walking. I had no idea what we were walking into. I was lost in the dark, and my guide was acting strange. He only ever gave one response. In the hollow is where we lay, he said, and there we remain until the earth forgives us for what we did to it. I kept my distance as he muttered. I held a wary eye on the brush around us, trying to see if anyone else was around. Eventually, he stopped at a dip in the land and stared down with his back facing me. Here, he said, pointing into the rolling earth. This ain't no camp, I said. Where the hell is everyone? The man didn't have a chance to mutter a sound before a saber flashed and his head tumbled from his body. Another man in muddy jean cloth held the sword and stumbled forward as he fixed his gray hat. He'd emerged from the dip and continued with ferocious arcs of steel as he cut into the man's body. I dropped my rifle and covered my mouth in horror. The rebel swordsman looked my way at the sound and rushed to his feet. You ain't supposed to be here, he said to me. You ain't supposed to be here. He raised his blade and started staggering toward me, and I started stumbling back. My legs were like jello, and the man was still muttering, his savage face obscured by the shade of his wide hat. I fell back and scrambled as he approached. He was gaunt as a scarecrow and moved with horrible, jagged steps. You ain't supposed to be... His words were cut off by the blossoming point of a bayonet. Another blue-coat man was behind him, dragging him to the ground as more figures crawled out of the dip behind them. Forms of gray and blue, ragged and covered in mud, were bashing each other with the stocks of rifles and tackling opponents to the dirt with bowie knives in hand. I watched as they fought and dragged each other back into the pit. Each side carried their fallen over the drop, and the swordsman was no different. 2 men took hold of his ankles and dragged him back to the hollow, the bayonet and rifle still stuck through him. The fighting continued, and I was half convinced I'd come across a group of crazies strung out on drugs. I was convinced that someone, anyone, had to have phoned the cops at the commotion. But no sirens came. Instead, I beheld one final gruesome sight that sent me to my feet and kept me sprinting into the dark. On the edge of the fall, standing limp but attentive, was the headless form of the man who'd led me to that place. His shoulders turned toward me, and he pointed a finger down into the ditch. The hollow is where we lay, I remembered him saying, and there we remain until the earth forgives us. By the time I stopped running, a ranger's flashlight was in my face, and my buddies from the 105th were crowding me. They got me loaded into an ambulance, and EMTs checked me over for damage. As far as they could tell, I had a nasty bump on the head and a possible concussion, but apart from that and the clear shock I was in, there wasn't anything wrong. My buddies grilled me on what had happened. They told me that in the final part of the battle, I'd disappeared and had been missing for 4 hours. I kept telling them that I didn't remember,
And now, when any of them ask, I still tell them I somehow must have gotten lost. It's an inside joke now with them. Don't get lost like... I don't reenact that much anymore, outside of a few festivals. I don't like thinking about what I saw. Up next, I got reassigned to this lab after they caught me sleeping and mumbling about goblins. I'm surprised I wasn't fired, but at this laboratory, things work a bit differently. It is 12-hour overnight shifts with me and one other guard. We take turns driving a golf cart aimlessly around the parking lot for 2 hours. On the 2 hours off, they specifically want us to sleep. I've never seen anything like it. There is just a desk in a corner of the receiving area. Scientists in white lab coats run past all night, speaking mostly various Asian languages, and other workers run past speaking mostly Spanish. They actually made sure I was monolingual before posting me here. You would think I am supposed to keep an eye on all these scientists and workers. But nope. The chair behind the desk is way more comfortable than it looks, and for some reason, I am always so tired when I get there. I was specifically instructed to doze off, but that wasn't the weirdest part. So there I am, sound asleep, having crazy dreams while scientists and workers run around. And if my dreams were crazy before, they are absolutely wild now. Every single dream has become the same. But that wasn't the worst part. I am on a bridge. Behind me, the bridge leads to a small forested island.
In front of me is the mainland, and there are all these humanoid shadows peeking out of the jungle, trying to cross the bridge. As long as I watch them, they won't. I call them humanoid shadows and not shadow people, because whatever they are very much not people. Something about the dream is always so inexpressibly bleak. Anyway, they wake me up and send me out on the golf cart again so the other guard can take her nap. Getting paid to sleep is a great deal, so you cannot blame me for doing what I am told and not thinking too hard about it. This all went quite well, until one night, by sheer coincidence, while listening to an audiobook on the golf cart, I learned about the Spanish word duende. Apparently, it can refer to a lot of different elf-like creatures. For the purposes of this, I will call them goblins. I say that because after driving the golf cart that night, I went back to the sleeping desk and could have sworn I kept hearing the workers say that exact word. Duende. I came back the next night armed with an assortment of memorized words that are roughly equivalent to goblin in several Asian languages. I don't know any of these languages, and I was probably wrong about some of them, but I swear I keep hearing those exact words. All these scientists and workers seem to be talking on and on about goblins every single night. Why? Are they just really into fantasy? And does it have anything to do with my dreams? Because now, every time I have those dreams of myself on the bridge, watching the humanoid shadows coming out of the jungle, I keep catching myself calling them goblins. I was dreaming about these things, and now they might be real. I remember what they said I was mumbling when they woke me up at my last post, and whatever these humanoid shadows are, I swear I keep seeing them out of the corner of my eye, everywhere I go now. Sleep deprivation, right? My brain is getting delirious and my pattern recognition is going haywire. There is no way this laboratory cares about fantasy goblins, right? But why would my brain make that up? It is so incredibly specific. And the dreams, the shadows, that bleakness. What do they have in this laboratory? Up next, I went to a social meetup at Mackenzie's pub to make new friends, but I was walking into a trap. Desk, PC, camping chair, loose belongings scattered around my air mattress. That's about it. I went to my new job and completed the mandatory work induction without falling asleep, only to find my colleagues and I don't exactly have much in common. I'm a 21-year-old web designer at a small engineering firm. My counterpart is off sick, seemingly for the long term, and my boss, Gary, is in his 60s. Gary arrives for work in the morning, grunting and growling, says, "Good morning," to anyone within earshot, and loads up the company webpage. He refreshes it, clicks on the About Us section, refreshes it. Then he slaps his thighs and declares it's coffee time. Would I like one? No? Okay. Well, old Gary will just be over in the kitchenette till mid-morning at least if you need him, boring half the workforce to death. Despite the apparent sparsity of challenging work, the job would do fine. I might be a little on the young side to say this, but I felt the foundations of my life were creaking, and that was before my ex cheated on me. I have trouble integrating. I get panic attacks. People say I look angry, even when I'm not. I think that's just how my face looks when I'm concentrating, or when I'm trying to make sense of an idiom or a joke. And that's when my quiet life took a terrifying turn. I suppose my long hair doesn't help, and the fact that my chief interests are metal music, gaming, and combat sports. People just assume. But that wasn't the worst part. A fresh start was in order, and what better time than now? I joined a gym and started nodding at a few familiar faces. I went to some nature festival in the town hall and listened to hippies talk about leaves for an hour. There were drinks afterwards, but again, I couldn't find anyone with my vibe. Everyone there was old, sporty, or outdoorsy. I took a swig of warm beer and felt a rush of inspiration. Alcohol was the key. I left my drink and headed home. Scrolling through Facebook, I found a promising event. Group Social 21 to 30, a friendly social meetup for people new in town or for locals looking to expand their social circles. Location, Mackenzie's Irish Pub. Date, Friday, 10th of April, 2026. Time, 1900. Going, 11. Interested, 25. Bingo. It was Thursday 9th, and Mackenzie's was just down the street. Another day with Gary passed at the office, and I walked home, my impassive expression hiding the butterflies I felt in my stomach. I ate some pasta, leaving the garlic out, and wandered over to my clothes rail. What to wear? I decided on the Old Faithful, gray baggy jeans, green flannel shirt, and black etnies. I untied my hair and headed to Mackenzie's. By the time I got there, I was sweating, and not from the cold. I waited by the door and took a couple of deep, ragged breaths. My head was pounding and my palms were damp. I clenched my fists and released again. It'll be okay once I've had a beer or two, I thought. It was enough to get me over the threshold. Inside was a dark, cramped room with several alcoves branching off the main thoroughfare. It was deserted, apart from a group floating around the polished wood of the main bar. I sidled up to a guy leaning against the jukebox. "Hey man, is this the group meetup?" I asked. "I think so, but I only just got here myself," he said. Someone overheard and confirmed to us that it was. We both breathed a sigh of relief. I wanted to make friends, but I was walking into a trap. "I'm Mark," I said, offering a hand to the jukebox leaner. The portly man shook it and said, "Short for anything?" "No, because I'm Marcus. Wondered if we were named the same." "Oh, got you. No, I'm just Mark, like the disciple." Marcus pushed his glasses up his nose and widened his already wide stance. "Yeah, think I've heard of him. You new in town?" I nodded. "Same here." He scratched at his beard and looked me up and down before grinning. "You're a metal man, aren't you?" "How can you tell?" I said, returning his smile. "You make it obvious with the hair, the clothes, and an expression like one of the Easter Island statues, you know? Tortured and sad, kinda. I like to camouflage a little." He opened his palms, inviting me to inspect his outfit. A black buttoned cardigan strained over a gray t-shirt, and the blue jeans he wore were too long for him. The Nike sneakers were downright filthy and unlaced, and the denim around his heels was frayed into threads. "So, you're one of us, undercover," I said. "I am. You got a favorite band?" Marcus bought me a drink, and we chatted happily about Gojira, Avenged Sevenfold, and Mastodon. It even turned out that he knew a thing or two about MMA, and we went along a conversational tangent naming niche UFC athletes before getting into a good-natured debate about who the greatest fighter of all time was. I was finally relaxing, but the real danger was already closing in. "Hey, it's my round. What do you want, Marcus?" "Most generous of you, sir. Just a beer, the second cheapest. I'm not classy, but I don't drink piss. Heading to the little boy's room, I'll be back in a sec." Marcus clapped me on the back and strolled off to the bathroom as I headed to the bar, wallet in hand. I felt a pleasant buzz at the edge of my senses and realized I was smiling. God, it felt good just to shoot the crap with someone like that. I looked around at the other attendees, feeling my confidence build. As I turned back to the bar, I noticed a shaven-headed man in a faded brown leather jacket sliding up to me. His shoulders were broad and his jaw square. "Hey, my girlfriend saw you from across the bar and we really dig your vibe. Can we buy you a drink?" "Pardon?" "We like you. Can we get you something?" "No, Then I saw her. Dark eyeliner winged out from each hungry eye. Her black hair was cut into a bob that framed a heart-shaped face, and a small hoop pierced one nostril of her pixie nose. She was petite and lithe, sitting on a bar stool with one leg hooked over the other. Her denim skirt was short, and the form-fitting long-sleeved top she wore was a pulsating red. Leaning forward to prop her delicate chin on her fist, those wicked eyes slackened. "Our treat," she purred, before turning to the bartender. "A tequila soda with a squeeze of lemon and 2 beers, please." Her voice was smooth as caramel. "Thanks, I'm Mark." "Evelyn," she said, offering a manicured hand. Part of me wanted to kiss it. She was everything my ex wasn't, and I liked her for that. "And yourself?" I turned to the square-jawed man, but he'd vanished while I was gawking at Evelyn. "That's Jan. He's going for a smoke," she said, hopping down from her stool as the drinks were served. She came closer. Her perfume smelled like the promise of trouble, a dark blend of cherries and something spiced. I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. "Do you smoke, Mark?" "I don't." "Sure," I said. I grabbed the 2 beers and followed her outside to the fenced-off smoking area. We stopped just outside the door, and she took Jan's beer over to where he stood some distance away, brooding. They exchanged a few words, and she sauntered back to me. "New in town, Mark?" she said, lighting my cigarette. "Yeah." "We're locals. Things get a little stagnant after a while, though. Figured we'd come along to this meetup and see if we find anyone who matches our vibe." She put a hand on my chest and winked. "Our freak, if you know what I mean." I blushed and looked over at Jan, standing rigid. "You're together, right?" I asked. "Yeah, but you can have me. He won't mind." "I gotta be honest, I only came to make friends." "Am I not your friend?" she said, pouting. "I didn't say that." She swung an arm around the back of my neck and pulled my head down to her chest. "How about we go and be friends over at my place?" Evelyn whispered in my ear. I lifted my head up and found myself breathing her in, drowning in those dusky eyes. She cupped my cheeks, drew my mouth down to hers, and kissed me. When we broke, she bit her lip and led me out onto the street. She pulled me through the rain to her apartment. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw the dark figure of Jan following at a distance, cigarette glowing as he took a drag.
Evelyn and I ran up the spiral staircase of her apartment block and barged through the door, fumbling at each other as we passed through the living room to the bedroom. I heard the door reopen and close again. "Does he get involved in this?" I asked, breathless. "Do you want him to?" "Not really. He can sit out there on the couch and listen in. He likes that." I hesitated, but Evelyn was taking her top off now. "You hear that, baby?" she shouted. "Go wild in there, you two," came Jan's response, as I heard the click of a remote and faint droning of a TV show. Evelyn unbuttoned my shirt and tossed it into the doorway under slim shafts of moonlight shining through the slatted blinds. Suddenly self-conscious, I excused myself and went into the ensuite. I took a quick leak and splashed water on my face, and then things took a truly unbelievable turn. Looking in the mirror, I saw the light shift. I turned and peeked through the gap between the door hinge and the frame. "Evelyn?" The TV glowed into a dark living room beyond an open door. Evelyn writhed on the bed, roughing up the sheet and duvet. Into the doorway stepped Jan. He looked down on her with solemnity, but didn't intervene. I could hear bones breaking, flesh tearing, fluid gurgling as Evelyn convulsed into something else. Her head imploded into a dark, teethed recess, and her arms twisted outward wildly. Hands morphed into small, fleshy claws before bulging and hardening into pincers. Her spine curved wickedly in a reverse arc, and her legs joined together in a flailing mass, sharpening at the end. Her body was morphing away from something human and beautiful into something with cartilaginous potted sections and appendages. I drifted to the doorway, pale and sweating coldly. Jan stood firm. "She'll have you now," he said, and pushed me back into the room. Some burning mucus splashed onto the back of my neck, and I leapt forward, bull-rushing the man in my way. We grappled and fought on the living room floor until Jan straddled me. I bumped him forward with my knees, and he planted his veiny arms on either side of my head. Then I lunged for his right arm with my teeth and bit down savagely. Jan screamed, and I broke out from under him. I made for the door, hearing the skittering of legs on hardwood grow in volume. The vibrations rattled the soles of my bare feet as I slipped out onto the staircase, shutting the door on the hideous shape that had been Evelyn. A huge stinger the size of a kitchen knife splintered through the wood, and I heard the shriek of frothing jaws snapping together, outraged that there was no flesh to feast on. I bolted down the staircase and out into the drizzle, wearing nothing but my jeans. Marcus found me pounding at the window of Mackenzie's, burned on the back of my neck and screaming about scorpions.
He called an ambulance, and I was taken to the emergency room. The sterility, harsh lights, and long waiting times soon brought me back to my senses. I hate hospitals, so I got a cab back to my place in the early hours of the morning. You hear about drink spikings sometimes, so I figured that's what happened. Some psycho at the meetup spiked my beer. There was no Jan and Evelyn, no shape-shifting scorpion lady seducing town newcomers. I was grateful for the uneventful week that followed. Each hour that passed put distance between that night and the present moment. The embarrassment of it all. This morning, I pulled on my work polo shirt, tied my hair back, hooked my laptop bag over my shoulder, and headed for the front door. Another Monday, another tally added to the wall of the capitalist jail cell. Posted under my door was a yellow envelope. I put down my bag and picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside was a card that read, "Dear Mark, great to meet you the other night. We'll see you around.
Love from your friends, Jan and Evelyn. Kiss, kiss, kiss. Up next. My grandmother has Lewy body dementia, but she's been talking to the husband she buried in the barn. The thunderstorm beat a cold rhythm down on my truck the whole way. For the last 60-odd years, Graham lived in a mountain farmhouse that my grandfather built. I spent most of the ride up to their place wondering how this visit was going to go. History had taught me there was no foregone conclusion to be had. What was I going to tell Graham if she didn't recognize me? How was I going to calm her down? Last time I saw her, she'd come at me with a knife. Graham had Lewy body dementia, and it wasn't pretty. She wasn't just forgetful, she was going mad. Over the years, Graham became well known for bothering folks, especially the little ones. She'd do things like stare from around corners. Sometimes she'd hiss at the grandchildren like some big jerk of a cat while she crawled on all fours. She scared the little ones half to death. One morning, she'd popped into the playroom while baby Jane was there alone. My cousin and baby Jane's mother, Sam, caught Graham rolling on her back, grasping at Jane with bloodied, peeled fingernails and mewing like a sickly kitten. Graham was topless that time to boot. She'd outdone herself once again. Jane went nonverbal after that, and my cousin Sam hasn't come around since. She didn't want to risk her little girl being exposed to Graham ever again. But that wasn't even the worst part. Lately, Graham had taken to bouts of frantically begging in the night. They heard her chanting from time to time, only she couldn't articulate her words. It was like she was choking on her words with a dry mouth, like her vocal cords were paralyzed. Sometimes, late at night, they'd find her out of bed with the house's security alarm blaring. Without fail, she'd be having long talks with Grandpa in the barn, speaking tongues after midnight. Only Grandpa was long dead, 6 feet under her. Grandpa died young in the style of grandpas of his day. That is to say, he was liquored up in town and running off at the mouth. Frontier justice, some'd call it. Graham buried his body in the barn where they used to keep the goats. Family legend has it that Graham had started digging Grandpa's grave right there inside the barn after the first night she found Grandpa drunk and passed out in the hayloft. Mom and her little brothers never really cared much to go into the barn after Grandpa passed. Who could blame them? When Grandpa went, Graham wasn't about to roll over and die too. She kept up the homestead in Grandpa's absence. It was even better than before. She started up the first little roadside produce stand the county had ever seen. Goat cheese and pickled carrots in the winter, yellow peaches and jalapenos in the summer. Business was good. Graham never remarried, though some suitors had offered her marriage over the years. She thought men were foolish playthings for silly girls. She was a self-styled frontierswoman, not a bride-to-be. She hunted her own food, distilled her own liquor, worked the land, and sold her own wares well enough to put my mom and her 2 younger brothers through state college. When the diagnosis came, Mom said Graham didn't bat an eye. Tear 1 never rolled down Graham's cheek. She was just too hard-headed, too unrelenting for any disease to slow her down. She used to brag, "That jerk Louie never tussled with a woman like her." If only that had been true.
Maybe things wouldn't have gotten so dark. I was driving straight into a nightmare and had no clue. It was Mom that called me and asked me to come to Graham's. I had to save my family, but the danger was already waiting. "Margie, Uncle Bill needs a break." Crap, me too, Mom. I need a break from everything. Work's been a nightmare. They're replacing my whole graphics department with AI. Ooh, fancy. It's fancifully freaking. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Sugar. I know you work hard on your little computer pages. That felt a little patronizing. Why can't Uncle Bill watch Graham? He's planning on taking Miss Jean down to Gatlinburg for a few days. Miss Jean's going to that open-eye Alzheimer's Institute that Billy took Graham to. Do you think you can come up and just sit with Graham while Billy's gone? I know she'd love to see you, sweetheart. Billy says she's doing real well lately. Her new medication is working really, really well. Well, that's good news. I know. The doctor from the Institute put her on some new meds. She hasn't even been wearing diapers, Marge. She's got this newfangled iPad that goes right to the doctor's phone. Can you believe that? It's a miracle. Mom. And it'll be a quick couple days, Marge. A quick weekend visit, in and out. I'd go myself, sweetie, but I've got my knee operation coming up this week. I don't know, Mom. I've got a lot on my plate with work, and it could be your last time seeing her, Margie. Mom left a pregnant pause while she sweetened her tone. Graham adores you. She always called you her mini-me. She'd be so thrilled to see you. One last time. The guilt trip was successful. I agreed. I packed my overnight bag and was on my way to Graham's a couple of hours later. It rained hard the whole way. The fog on my windshield made it really hard to see. I fiddled with the AC trying to clear it up. I wasn't fully paying attention as I turned down the old road to Graham's place. I was going too fast as I rounded the flooded corner, and the steering pulled hard away from me. I tried to yank it back. My truck hydroplaned. I completely lost control. I pumped the brakes as hard as I could. I came within a couple feet of slamming into a cable repair truck before my brakes finally caught. The flashing orange lights of the utility truck painted my windshield. Two men in fluorescent vests sat behind the wheel of the white, windowless repair truck. They motioned like they were angry. I think one of them flipped me off. It was hard to tell through the spiked adrenaline and rainy windshield. As I drove past them and up the hill towards Graham's, I thought I heard someone shout. The dirt path up to Graham's had become a treacherous river of mud. About halfway through the narrow climb, my truck got stuck. I spun my tires like mad and ended up dug in deeper than crap. My phone had no coverage on the mountainside either. I was just about to smash my head into the steering wheel and get out to walk when I saw her. Through the pouring rain dashing my windshield, I saw the figure of Graham in her pink nightie coming towards me. She was shouting something I couldn't make out. I rolled down the window in the old truck fast. Cold water splashed into my ear. "Graham, that you?" I hollered through the cracked window. "What can I help you with?" Graham called back. "Graham, it's fine. Go back inside. The truck is stuck. I'll take care of it." But what she did next made absolutely no sense. "If a truck is stuck in mud, do this in order." She waddled a couple feet forward. "First, stop spinning the tires. Spinning just digs you deeper." Graham was wading through shin-deep mud towards me now. Torrential rain beat down on her frail form. "Graham, I know. Please, go back in. You'll catch your death out." "Put it in the lowest gear you have." Graham waved her hands frantically, now hip-deep in the muck. "If it's four-wheel drive, engage 4 low, not just 4 high." I didn't know what the hell she was talking about. What the freaking was 4 low or 4 high? She looked like she was getting closer to drowning with every step she took. But things were about to get a whole lot weirder. I opened the driver's side door and shouted, "Graham, it's fine. Please go back inside. I'll see you back at the house." Graham stared a while. Waves of sloshing mud lapped at the waist of her pink nightgown. Rain washed the mascara off her face, and she smiled. She looked like she was buffering. Like she was freeze-framing at the end of a sitcom. Her pupils seemed to overpower the whites of her eyes. I'd seen this look before. She looked madder than a crap house rat. Graham turned back and plodded towards the house. As she walked off, she turned and called, "You're tapping into something really foundational about the relationship between trucks and mud. A thing that not everybody sees as clearly as you. The mud is not just mud sinking your truck. It's a canvas. And your truck—" "Graham, please, shut the freaking up and go inside. I got it!" I put my whole body into that shout. I felt bad about cutting her off so rudely, but holy crap, what was she on about? I stood and watched her trudge back into the house through the pouring rain. She was covered nearly head to toe in mud. As I watched her, the cold rain stung my face. Only now, I couldn't tell how much of it was rain and how much of it was a cold sweat from the adrenaline of Graham's sudden appearance. What in the hell was she doing? What was she on about? It's nice she wanted to help, even encouraging to hear her communicate so clearly. It was the first time in so long that she'd made much sense, but at the same time, something felt really off about her. I abandoned the truck, grabbed my bag, and followed Graham up the stone walkway. The gravel garden and the plants along the walkway were overflowing with dark water. I splashed every step of the way up the stairs to Graham's front door. I opened Graham's door to the welcome sight of old Charlie curled up on the rug at the front of the foyer. I couldn't believe he was still alive. I thought he'd had to have been 15 years ago. Guess there's no telling with swanky fat cats. I let the door shut gently behind me as I reached down towards the luxurious little fur ball. He must have smelt me coming and not cared for it. Maybe I accidentally dripped onto him. Either way, Charlie slowly extended his paw and within the blink of an eye had clawed me 3 or 4 times on my forearm. Deep. "Freaking!" I hissed under my breath as the fat little bastard trotted off into the kitchen. With every step he took, the little brass jingle bell on his collar rang out joyously, as if it was singing, "Freaking you, Marge, you dumb jerk!" The pale white claw marks in my forearm had just given way to deep red rivers of blood when Graham came out from the kitchen. "Did that rotten bastard get you? Charlie! Oh, you'd better hide, you naughty boy!" She turned her eyes on me. "Let's see what he's done to you, dear." Lightning flashed. The power in Graham's home wavered. Graham stood still as a statue in the darkness, as if she'd just been frozen in time. In the background, I thought perhaps I'd heard an explosion. She was groaning, and her head slumped. I suddenly felt overcome with the smell of wet earth. "Graham?" "Don't let them know," Graham spoke in a husky voice. The moment passed, and the lights came back on. Graham hurried to my aid. I felt like a child again as Graham drew me into the kitchen, put my arm under the tap, and ran cold water over the bloody scratches as she clutched my wrist. As Graham blew on my arm and dabbed at it with paper towel, I noticed something. She looked good. Like, really good. The lines around her lips, there used to be 1,000,000 of them, but now they were gone. Her long blonde hair draped over her face, and it had bounce. She looked like she did in her wedding photos. Older, obviously, but still. Her skin looked smoother, too, like a woman 20 years younger than Graham was. Then I noticed she was wearing a blue striped blouse,
Not the mud-soaked pink nightie I'd seen her in just moments prior. I thought she must really have some new pep in her step if she'd been able to change so quickly. Graham bandaged my arm. It felt so much better already. Thunder rumbled, and the power went out. "Have y'all been losing power a lot?" I asked Graham. "It's not me," she continued, winding the bandage on my arm. "What do you mean?" "Graham, that's plenty good." But she wouldn't stop. She kept winding, and the bandage was starting to feel really tight. "Graham, that's tight enough. Thank you." I tried to pull my arm back. She pulled my arm back towards her. The lights in the kitchen flickered and came on with a hum. Graham looked up at me with a knowing smirk. "Reality check, Marge. Most scratches are totally fine, but ignoring one that's getting worse, that's where people mess up."
The danger isn't the scratch. It's the infection you don't notice early. She sounded like she was giving a presentation. I didn't think it was that serious. And she didn't use any neosporin on my arm or anything antibacterial. I wondered if she even knew what she was saying. Even so, I kept a watchful eye out for Charlie and an ear out for the bell on his collar. I didn't want any more trouble. I laid out on the plastic-protected floral print couch in Graham's living room. My eyes traipsed across the many old family pictures framed on the walls. Maybe it was the childlike peace of being at Graham's, or maybe it was the pitter-patter of rain at the window. Maybe it was the lack of feeling in my tightly bandaged arm. Either way, I fell fast asleep. I dreamt of being on a jungle adventure, exploring the rainforest. I'd just come out of some ancient ruin when I needed to jump off a waterfall. In the dream, I jumped. Suddenly, I found my hands smacking against the tile floor in real life, in the dark. I was on my hands and knees in the living room, mere inches from smashing my eye socket against the corner of Graham's coffee table. My hands and knees were damp. Warm water. It was only after I felt the moisture on my knees that I registered the sound of Graham's tub faucet running at full blast. The power was out in the house. I scrambled my way to the bathroom through the flooded dark hallway and flung open the door. Graham, still fully clothed, was floating face down in the overflowing tub. Her iPad floated between her legs. The iPad replayed a warning through its flooded speaker. "Thinking. Longer. Better. Answer," the iPad repeated in a monotone AI voice. I rushed to her and pulled her with all my might out of the tub and into my lap as I sat with my back pressed against the bathroom wall. "Graham!" I beat on Graham's back with the heel of my hand in the darkness. Nothing but the dull thud of flesh on muscle. I laid her down and started performing what I thought was CPR. I kept the rhythm of ha, 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 pressing down on her chest, then staying alive, holding her nose and breathing into her mouth. Nothing. I kept going through my tears. Graham's nose began to run. On my last attempt to breathe into her, I tasted her mucus. Just then, the power cut back on, and Graham drew the deepest breath I've ever heard in my life and rose upright in my arms like a vampire rising from its coffin. She shrieked. She wailed. She shook uncontrollably for a long time. I didn't know what else I could do but hold her there. I tried to ask her how it happened, but she was practically nonverbal. At some point, as we sat there, already entangled, I decided to brush her hair. I started slowly. It seemed to soothe her. She leaned her head against my chest. I swept her hair away from her neck. Graham had 4 or 5 little black staples behind her ear. I stared for a little while.
There was a drop of translucent fluid that seeped out and formed around the scarring. Maybe she'd had a facelift? Was that why she looked so good? Maybe she just didn't want to talk about it. Maybe she didn't like how it looked. I helped Graham towel off and got her into bed. I pulled her covers up around her shoulders and made sure her feet were covered. I left her TV on Big Bang Theory. Graham had a thing for those boys. When I was sure she was asleep, I got up and put her still damp iPad on its charger. I gave Graham a kiss on the forehead and went off to dry up the water that had overflowed from the bathtub. I worked for a good couple hours cleaning up before going to bed. I can't remember what time I fell asleep, but I woke up to a loud noise a little after 3 in the morning. The sound I heard was deafening, almost indescribably ear-piercing. It felt like a crack in my brain, like corks had been popped out of my ears, releasing thousands of pounds of pressure. There was a sound like a deflating balloon, but something about it rang in my mind. I pulled my knees to my chest as I came to. Just as I started to breathe right, everything felt too still, too quiet, until I heard a purring sound. I searched the darkness of the bedroom for its origin. Something shadowy skittered off my bed. I felt its weight alleviate the springs of my mattress. It pedaled across the floor and scurried out the door like a rat. It looked like Charlie, only larger. I brought the blanket to my face and screamed. I hyperventilated. I felt that I could barely stay conscious through the fear.
Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that the light in the barn was on. I was awake now. I knew from the stories Mom and Uncle Billy had told that Graham would be in the barn. I just wanted to get Graham back inside so we could both get some sleep. I threw on a robe over my pajamas and ran out back barefoot. As I hustled over to the barn, I could already tell it was open. I hurried in and looked around. Graham was nowhere to be seen in the pitch darkness. I used my phone's flashlight to illuminate the surroundings. Nothing looked out of place at first until I noticed the floor. There was a dark splatter of what looked like blood spray at my feet. It was still wet. The underside of my jaw was sore. I felt a pain at the back of my throat and inside of my ears. I felt my nose dripping. I reached up and pinched the bridge of my nose. When I pulled my fingers back, they were coated in a clear liquid. Something wasn't right. I heard a shriek coming from the house. Graham must be hurt, my mind raced as I sprinted back across the yard to the house. I slipped in through the sliding glass door to the living room and hurried up the steps. I barreled down the hallway and burst through Graham's bedroom door. There she was, sleeping, just like I'd left her hours earlier. The Big Bang Theory had given way to reruns of The Twilight Zone. I shut Graham's TV off. I went around the house locking doors and windows and went back to bed. The next day, the rain was non-stop. I woke up nearly late for a Zoom meeting I had to take. I fired up my laptop and plugged it in. Graham didn't have the internet. I hotspotted my phone and went to log into it on my laptop. I noticed that besides my hotspot, there was another Wi-Fi signal there named Clara, aka Graham. Maybe Uncle Billy talked her into it. Just as I was pulling the work meeting up, I saw Graham behind me making a cup of coffee in the kitchen. "Hi, everybody. So good to see the team," I called out cheerfully as I joined the meeting. "Marge, how have you been? How's the visit?" "How's the visit? How's the is it?" My co-worker Stephanie was frozen, her audio stuck on repeat. Lightning struck and thunder shook the house. All the lights went out.
I looked into the kitchen and could only see Graham's shadow. "Graham, you okay? That was a big one." She wouldn't say anything back to me. The lights came back on slowly, from dim to fully lit. I realized the person I'd seen in the kitchen was actually a chair with one of Graham's coats on it. I breathed a sigh of relief. I made my way into the kitchen, now ready for a cup of joe myself. As I rounded the corner, I saw Graham's cup of coffee on the counter. The back door out of the kitchen was wide open. And there was Graham, out the back door in the pouring rain. She stared at me from behind the wall of the garage some 30 yards away. Her eyes were wide. As soon as we made eye contact, she ran out of sight. I couldn't chase after her, or at least my 40-year-old legs refused till it was necessary. "Graham, can we settle down, please? It's just me, Margie, your mini-me," I hollered at her from the doorway as I tried to put my shoes on. Graham was faster than she had any right to be. I gave up on the shoes when she was already halfway down the driveway. At some point, I'd lost sight of her. I searched the tree line, but couldn't find her. I honestly broke. I gave up. I couldn't. Not anymore. I turned around and trudged my way back to Graham's, where I was going to call Mom and get picked up. Freaking, but I had that work call. I rushed back inside the house. I snatched up my laptop and turned it on. It came to a few seconds later. It was about the same time that it came on as I heard the back door snap shut. I muted myself. "Graham, that you?" I didn't hear anything. I unmuted the work call. "Apologies, guys. I'm so sorry for the delay." No sooner had I opened my laptop to the Zoom call than Graham had jumped onto my back. She clawed into my shoulders. The laptop slipped out of my hands and crashed onto the floor. "Marge, you all right? Should we call 911? One of my coworkers called out. No, everything's fine." I managed to close the Teams window just as Graham hit me in the face with her iPad. My bell was rung. I fell face first off the couch. Graham grabbed me by the throat and pinned the back of my head to the floor by putting her whole weight on me and riding me into the ground. "You're with them! Admit it!" Graham screeched. "Chill out, you old jerk!"
I kicked her old ass right in the freaking gut as she towered over my back. She recoiled, doubling over. She tried to run. I turned and tossed laptop, hitting her square in the back of her knee. Her left leg flung forward and out from under her. She fell forward into the wall, putting the crown of her skull through the drywall. She made a sound like a beaver that got punched in the face. Her hands felt their way up, and Graham was able to push herself off the wall. As she stood, she held her stomach and looked like she was going to crap herself. Graham ran off into her room, bouncing off the hallway walls. I could hear her weeping for a while. I felt like I'd lost my ever-loving mind. I just donkey-kicked my sick grandmother into tears. I tomahawked her octogenarian knee with a MacBook. I sat outside Graham's bedroom door. I apologized to her. I told her I loved her through the door. I waited a long while for a response, but none ever came. I went my own way, laying down in my bedroom with the door locked. I woke up a couple hours later to something that smelled absolutely delicious. I heard the nostalgic sound of Graham humming a tune. I'm not sure I ever knew what tune it was, but nothing made me happier. I followed my nose out of the bedroom and into the hallway. The heat from the kitchen radiated all the way to my bedroom door. It felt like a warm hug.
I saw Gram, but only in shadowy vignettes as she crossed the hallway from the kitchen. "Is that your famous chicken pot pie, Gram? Sure does smell good." Gram smiled. "You know it." She let out a silly little laugh and shook a wooden spoon at me playfully. She looked so good, so alive. "You about ready to eat, Margie?" "Yes, ma'am." I pulled out a seat at the plastic-covered dining room table. Gram brought me a slice of pie in a piece of fine china with ice blue designs. It was so intricately painted, it looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. The pot pie smelled absolutely heavenly, too, and it tasted even better than it looked. I gave in to my gluttony. I finished my first piece, and Gram served me seconds. "I'm glad you like it," Gram smiled. "It's even better than I remembered," I replied. "Well, you haven't tried this one before, silly." I giggled, thinking she was right. Just like this visit, every day is a new experience. I chowed down. I obliterated my second portion. The only thing left was a little gravy around the edges of my plate and a little plop of chicken goop in the center. When I forked the little plop of chicken goop, it felt like a hearty little morsel. I pulled it to my mouth, but as I bit into the goop, it rang. It rang like a bell. It rang in a way I'd heard 1,000 times before. "Where's Charlie, Gram?" I asked. Gram looked down at her plate. "He was a very naughty boy," Gram replied. I felt a heat rush through my body, from my heart to my fingertips. I reached into my mouth and pulled out a little brass bell, the very same one from Charlie's collar. My eyes snapped shut and I puked my mind out. I didn't stop puking until there was nothing left inside of me. I knocked over chairs and nearly took Gram out as I feverishly tried to feel my way to the bathroom. At some point, I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was face to face with Gram as I laid on the barn floor. "Hurry up, he's almost awake." Gram released her grip on the back of my head and my skull thudded into the dirt. Through the haze of what must have been a concussion, I saw Gram step down into a massive hole in the barn. I watched her pull her hair back, revealing the scars on either side of her head. She plunged her middle and forefingers into the wounds, digging about. When she pulled her fingers back, they were coated in blood and the clear liquid I'd seen before. "He's almost had his fill," Gram sounded excited. "Who, Gram?" I barely recognized my own voice. "He's gonna need some of yours, too. He's a hungry boy." I pulled myself onto my elbow. I had a better vantage point to see what Gram was doing. She had both of her hands shoved into the jaws of a desiccated corpse I can only assume was my grandfather. I swear that the corpse shuddered beneath her hands. I didn't wait to find out what was coming next. I dashed out of the barn, closing and locking the barn door behind me. No sooner had I sealed the barn door, but something heavy crashed against it, splintering some of the door's frame. "Come now, Mini-Me. It's time to meet Grandpa."
I ran as hard and as far as I could. I can see the house from here. It looks like the power is off. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I heard a man's voice, or at least, I think I did, a few minutes ago. It's getting light now. Maybe my Uncle Billy is back. I'm trying to get this message out to anyone that can pass it along to my mom or my uncle. Tell them Margie says there's something wrong with Gram and Grandpa,